Oh, yeah. Okay, great. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay.
Again.
So, Eleanor, for everybody who's listening, I want you to meet a creative activist. I found Eleanor on creativevisions.org, and I was so excited by the work that you're doing. And I want everybody to know about you and how did you get started in creative activism? And what is your definition of creative activism?
My definition of creative activism is using creative means, whether that be art, visual art, music, poetry, using these creative means to promote a message of social and political change. And I've always been creative. My mother's an artist, my father's a writer. So I grew up in a very creative household. And I also grew up in sort of an activist household. To me, activism is just about being aware about what's going on around you and being actively aware. So when I would go out running with the dog, I would pick up trash just because I didn't like the way it looked. And then that turned into environmental activism, which then turned into the anti-war activism around 2003, the Second Iraq War. And then that morphed into money in politics, which I see as this overarching evil that gives birth to all these other evils like war and like environmental destruction. So those two sort of came together when I was in LA working on music, and then my band came from that, and then other forms of art such as painting and poetry, and I connected with other creative activists through that.
Wow, that is so amazing to me. So let's talk about the political aspect, because and you have this program, that you're doing about acting out, and you're sharing things, and let's talk about it because I know there was the photo that got me was the one from Ferguson that they took when you had the flag over your mouth. That was so powerful and just an image. And I want people to recognize that's a simple thing that anybody could do to protest. But let's talk about that and how that came about.
I've been active. Basically, how I work is I work with several different organizations and several different issues, and I try to support whatever issues I can at the moment. And after this string of shootings and in fact beatings in LA when I was still there, and of course across the country in Ferguson and other places, the LAPD has a long history of violence, particularly against minorities, Hispanic and Black. So there was a big demonstration outside the LAPD, and I went, and my typical get up for as long as I can remember at protests has been an upside down flag across my face. And it's not so much to hide identity, it's to make a statement. Because obviously with my show and my band, I'm not trying to hide my identity. So it's more about a statement. And I was lucky enough to come across Nick, the photographer who took the Napalm Girl picture in Vietnam. And he asked if he could take a picture, and he did. And that picture ended up on Reuters, on several different news outlets, and it sort of became a symbol of the white alliance to the Black Lives Matter movement, which I was really proud of because I do think it's incredibly important that we not think of these issues as just those people's problems. Like the Black Lives Matter movement is not just for blacks. The feminist movement is not just for women. And so I think it's important that people saw that there is this alliance of people outside of the affected that are affected and that need to raise their voices.
Okay, so as an activist, what are some of the challenges you face going forward with your message? And you are very political and you're very out there and in people's faces. What are some of the challenges you've encountered along the way?
Well, besides the authorities, LAPD broke my phone, which is definitely not the worst that people have suffered at the hands of the LAPD. But authority figures don't want to relinquish control of this oligarchy, and of course the police are a small aspect of that. But on a greater scale, you have the people that are in power, the 1%, the people that you'll never meet on the streets and face to face, sort of. But the challenges for me are not the the broken phone or even the Secret Service coming up to me last night when I was out projecting, asking what I was doing. The real challenge for me are the 1%, the people that you don't see, the ones running the game and rigging the game. So for me, the challenge is getting to them and coming up with, again, creative ways as an activist through art and through creative means to get to them and to get to people, to get to them, because the people, the power of the people is really greater than that of the people in power. We just have to recognize that and then move forwards to realizing that.
I know for me, on a slightly less scale, there's things about, I believe that we need to create new dialogues, and using art and music and performance. Those are the ways I think that we can get that grassroots effort together, whatever the cause is, or whatever we want to do with that. And I know it's so interesting because people say, well, what can one person do? And what would you say to that?
I love that question, because I think it's such a great question, and it comes from a place of wanting to help. And I think everyone has this. I use this example in a show. If you passed by a cat on the street that was meowing and had a broken foot, you wouldn't walk past it unless you're like Ted Cruz or the Koch brothers or something. You'd help it. So I think that comes from a place of wanting to help. And so I love getting that question. And my answer is whatever it is that you're doing, just find the political parallel. If you're a chef, become involved in the anti-GMO movement. If you're a personal trainer, same thing, or become involved with the environmental movement because that has to do with our health. Whatever it is that is your passion in life, there is a political parallel to that passion. It just so happens that my passion is art and music and poetry. So I found a very distinct parallel to politics. So I think that the misconception is that people have to completely change their lives in order to become politically engaged, and that's not true. You can do something as simple as tweet out. If you're really good at those 140 characters, become an activist tweeter. It's really just about taking what you already do and applying that to politics. It's not this huge shift in your life. It's just a paradigm shift, and then the activist part, the action, will follow easily.
Sometimes I've run into people saying they're scared of the word activist. It has a real negative connotation. So what would you say to people?
I think it's the same thing with the word feminist. It just scares people, and it's because they don't understand the core concept of the word. An activist, again, to me, is just somebody who's actively aware of the world around them and does something about it. It's an action word, and I think that that's very powerful, and that can sound scary, particularly when mainstream media paints it as these, hippies in tents or these people throwing Molotov cocktails. It becomes sort of a scary word, but it's really not. I would say to everybody, be proud that you're an environmentalist, be proud that you're an activist, be proud that you're a feminist, because these are action words and they speak to people caring about what's happening in the world around them. The word apathy is far more scary to me because it shows that you're completely shut off. And I think it's a dangerous, even if things weren't as bad as they are, it's very dangerous to be completely shut off from the realities of situations and issues that we're experiencing.
When you say dangerous, what do you mean?
Well, I mean that when you're completely shut off, not only are you incapable of doing something about it, but you're incapable of realizing how bad things are until they happen to you. For example, the income inequality. People don't even realize that they are being robbed. People don't even realize in a lot of ways that their futures are being, I don't want to use the word destroyed because it sounds so extreme, but their futures are being whittled down because of the income inequality in this country, because of climate change. And when you do take an active role in noticing, then you can take an active role in stopping it. And when you're shut off from that, it's very dangerous. It's like slowly walking towards a ledge blindfolded, and that's what a lot of people are doing. And so, like you do and like I do, using these creative means to wake them up is incredibly powerful, because then they see, oh shit, I'm walking towards a ledge. I better take this blindfold off.
An act for me is not necessarily the big, powerful act. It's the little ones, like you were saying. If you're good at tweeting, I think it's as simple as engaging in a conversation with somebody. We all see homeless people on the street, and this is my own thing. We walk by them. They're invisible, but they affect all of us, And so I know for me, I live in a affluent community. There's only 3 homeless men, but one of them lives in the park, and I always walk my dog there. And so a couple of years ago, he was rooting through the garbage, and I got him a food card, from Jewel. And then I didn't see him for a while, and I didn't know him. I didn't know his story, but he hangs out in the library all the time. Oh, I see your green smoothie. And yeah, so he and I went up to him and I got him another card and we started to talk and he said to me, he said, "I hope you're not mad." I said, "What?" He said, "I bought a box of dog biscuits to give to the dogs in the park. Now here's a man with nothing who is homeless and he's giving back." And that was the gift to me. It just opened my eyes and we've had these intense conversations and he's probably one of the most interesting, literate, well-read people I've ever known. Obviously he's got problems, but it was like he opened my eyes up to the questions about what homelessness. He said, people keep saying, "Well, go to another community." Why should I burden another community? I grew up here. This is my home. This is where my family was. I don't want to leave here. Shouldn't they provide some services for me? Why go to a poorer community and do something else? So it was like, wow, he enlightened me. And I think that's as simple as being an activist is just talking to somebody. What are the issues out there?
And I think, particularly with homelessness, the people that I met when I first moved to Los Angeles, I was homeless for a little bit, just getting on my feet. But of course, it wasn't something like a lot of homeless people, which is several years of trying to get back on their feet. But some of the people that I met are incredible people. I met a guy who used to teach philosophy. And he and I would just sit on the sidewalk and talk about Nietzsche and it's like this brilliant human being, but he had lost his job because they didn't need a philosophy teacher anymore because who cares about that? And he had never done anything else, so he couldn't figure out a way to apply his incredible talents. And that's the thing. I mean, homelessness is a great example of this. Is when you see that is a very tactile, visual example of a system that's not working, a system that's broken.
And how many of us walk by
and
just ignore it and turn our head the other way? And that's, yeah.
Exactly. If you look at the reality of the situation, we have enough housing to give every homeless person 3 houses. So it's certainly not an issue of space. It's certainly not an issue of resources. It's just that the system is not working for the people. And particularly in any system that's not a dictatorship, the system is built to work for people. And I think when you just walk past that and you close your eyes to it, it's the same issue as closing your eyes to climate change, closing your eyes to these like money and politics, these sort of obtuse or abstract concepts, because you won't even turn and look at the issue that's right in front of you.
I noticed myself, my sister was very much involved in the environment, and it wasn't necessarily one of my issues, but we went to a program, I went with her, and all of a sudden, it's just like inviting somebody to have a conversation about something that it's in the back of their mind. And so, I made some different choices after going to this, it was a movie about landfills, and stuff. And it was like, oh my God, look at this, people putting their couches in the landfill. Well, that's never going to go away, or things like that. And it was like, it opened my eyes. But then, and then it was the questions of, okay, is it better to leave the poop on the ground or pick it up, put it in a bag that is never going to disintegrate? It's those kind of questions, but it makes you wonder. And I love to be able to be part of these kind of conversations because they affect all of us. And they're simple things that we can just have, every day that we're all affected by.
And it's also important to think about the connectivity. You say environmentalism is not your main issue, and that's great. I also say to people, don't try to tackle all issues. I mean, my thing is a bit difficult because my issue is the umbrella issue. But even still, right. I think it's important. Today I'm going to TPP action at Congress. The other day I went to anti-war actions in Congress. I think for me, I like bouncing around, but for other people, that's all they do is environment. All they do is anti-war, and that's great. We need people like that. But I think it's also important to every now and then step back and say, okay, these are all connected. The Black Lives Matter movement is the environmental movement, is the income inequality movement, is the health movement. These are all connected because they are all indicative of a system that's broken and not working for us. So I think it is important to see that, and then, taking those little tidbits, like you said, like, oh, well, I can do something small now that I just sort of got a glimpse of the environmental movement. And these small changes and these small actions, they also get paid forward. Like you doing that might inspire somebody else to do the same thing, and on and on and
Oh, I
on.
totally believe in the ripple effect. That's why I started the Creative Activist, Facebook community, and I'm going to have a summit later on in September because I want to be able to pay it forward and bring these kind of ideas forward that we can all do something, that we can act, and it doesn't have to be the big action. It can be the small, intimate action of this one-on-one conversation with someone. So yeah, I'd love to talk a little bit more about what is it that you're trying to do when you go to these meetings in Congress, and how do you think that you can reach that 1%? What does that look like to you?
Well, to me, right now, these actions in Congress, these actions, projecting on government buildings that I did last night, these are not about reaching the 1%. These are about reaching the 99%. Because before we reach the 1%, we have to reach a critical mass. We have to reach that tipping point. There's a statistic that says that no government can withstand 3% of the population pushing against it. In absolutely any uprising that's ever happened in the history of humanity, 3%. And even a lot of times it's 1%. So when you think of it in that perspective, if we just got 1% of the population to push against the government and push towards real change, of ending the oligarchy, ending the corporatocracy, you would see that shift. And of course, all of these little 1%, these are little actions like we're talking about. These are people changing their paradigms and therefore changing the way that they live, their actions. So when I do these actions in Congress, I'm trying to reach, C-SPAN is there, at a Senate Finance Committee hearing, or the War Committee hearing. C-SPAN is there, and so people can see. And then, of course, news outlets pick it up when you hold signs or if you get arrested. So what we're trying to do is reach people and say, hey, look, there are people that care. Mainstream media won't report this, but there are people that care. There are people that are doing something, and you can join us. I think a lot of people, the reason that they don't do anything, particularly in my age group, 18 to 32, don't do anything because they think it's useless, that it won't matter, that it's like throwing twigs at a giant building. Like, who cares? But that's the thing. It's if more and more people thought the opposite, that, hey, we can affect change. There are people already doing it. We've stopped things like, the war with Syria by popular opinion, by people just saying, you know what, I don't think that that's okay, based on the work of activists. So if more people just flooded into that, I think that, obviously it would be very powerful. History shows that. So when I do these actions at Congress, they're really geared towards the 99%, because it's like having a conversation with a religious person about whether God exists. I'm not trying to turn the 1%. They're unturnable. They're sociopaths lost. But the 99% is definitely, like, we can definitely do something. And that's who I'm trying to get to. I'm trying to get them to see that, A, there are people working on this, and B, you can be one of those people. And please join us for the sake of your future and your kids' future and all of that.
Let's talk a little bit about your music, and your band and how that's played into it. And what did that start before, or did it evolve? And how is that political message translated through your music?
Well, I started singing when I was 4. I was classically trained as an opera singer. And then when I hit my teen years, I fell in love with Guns N' Roses, and that was that for my opera career. So in terms of the political aspect, I sort of had this eureka moment when I was living in LA, when I started to think, why don't I infuse my activism with the creativity that I've had my entire life, as opposed to keeping them separate. So that was sort of that eureka moment, and that was how Rooftop Revolutionaries was born. It was actually, Rooftop Revolutionaries was it was a political group that I started on my roof in Silver Lake. And that turned into the band. So in terms of how the message is promoted through the music, I think just like with any piece of art, when you give somebody something entertaining, when you give somebody something that's visually stimulating or pleasing, aesthetic, they're drawn in before they even necessarily realize what it is that they're doing. It's sort of insidious, but in a good way. So when people come to the shows, a lot of them come for a rock show. And then they get a message from the band the main message of the band is anti-corporatocracy, because, as I said, my main issue is dismantling the corporatocracy and getting control out of the corporations and into the people's hands. So that's the main message. But there are anti-war songs. There are environmental songs. So the message is very powerful. And of course, our merch table has that message as well. So it's sort of like people go for a rock show and end up being engaged in this sort of activist environment, and that's very powerful because it's non-confrontational. And they're a captive audience. I'm on stage with a microphone. They're listening. So it's a very powerful medium and a very powerful vehicle. And that's why I do think that artists have a responsibility to use that vehicle, because it's incredibly powerful and people connect to it on a level that's far deeper than a passing conversation perhaps, or handing out a leaflet. It's a deep emotional connection that they have, and if I can get somebody humming that song and listening to the lyrics, then I might get somebody to start to shift the way that they think and therefore shift the way that they act.
Okay. Do you ask people to take action from the stage? Do you
sometimes it depends on the issue of the day or the issue of the. We work with a lot of organizations, so sometimes I'll invite them to table with us. So I'll say, be sure to check out, the anti-fracking information at the table, but where we have our stickers, and you get a free sticker if you sign up for their email list or something like that. So there are definite actions that are part of the show. There's a balance that I think I'm still trying to strike. I think balance is a very difficult thing in life in general, but between preaching and engaging. Nobody wants to be preached at. Nobody wants to be told you need to do this or you have to do this. So I sort of engage with people. I might ask a question from the stage, like, who likes, flammable drinking water, or who likes being robbed by this dude in a suit? Like, sort of asking people a question, and then they're like, what? And then sort of engaging them that way, as opposed to saying, you need to support this, or you need to do that. I think that questions are also a very powerful way of getting people to pay attention and to engage with you, because, again, that is a non-confrontational way of putting it. I do rig the questions so that it's almost impossible to say what.
So what are your favorite?
One of them is who thinks this country is just doing fine, like who's totally okay with the system, regardless of left or right. And of course, everyone boos. And another one is who likes being robbed by a guy in a suit, basically, and turning that into the Wall Street conversation. And then, there are so many based on different issues, but it's basically questions like, do you like swimming in toxic waste? Do you like the way an oil spill looks? Do you like, radioactive fish, or do you like chemicals in your water? Questions like this that, particularly in California, were very powerful because, of course, you have the drought happening. You have people concerned about the ocean. You have people concerned about the environment. So I think my favorite questions are questions that I know will get to people because of either where they live or the demographic. We had a show that dealt with for Lady Parts of Justice that dealt with women's rights, and then the question was, do you like men regulating your vaginas? And of course, everyone says no. So I like really getting people's attention with questions that I know will make them, pay attention, even if they're at the bar talking to their friend. They'll be like, did she just say that? And I think that, again, that's a very important thing for artists to do, is not just use your medium, but also to think, like, how can I best reach people with this? Like a great example is Anthony Freda. He's an artist out of New York, and he just has this phenomenal way of reaching people with very powerful and strong messaging. And so I think that, it's he's a visual artist based out of New York, and he has incredibly.
Talk a little bit more about his work.
I guess it's difficult to describe visual art, but he does some phenomenal artwork, very biting and scathing criticism of the corporatocracy, the war machine, and how the government is owned by the 1%. just some really great imagery. Like there's this one image that I featured on last week's show with that says free speech zone, and then like pointed at are all these cameras and spotlights and everything. You know, it's a commentary on mass surveillance. And so I think he has a way of conveying complex messages with a very simple image that gets people to understand what it is that he's trying to say, which is, of course, another point of art, is that it has the ability to convey very complex messages through simple means.
Right. What would you like to see happen
well,
in the world?
I don't like to get.
What is it that your ultimate?
I think a utopia would be really boring. So I'm not like some of my friends that I know that think that living in this utopia society would be great. I think it would be awful. But I think that what I would like to see is the corporatocracy dismantled. I would like to see the people take their power back in a nonviolent way. Revolutions, unfortunately, they never turn out the way that you want them to. When blood is spilled, the military inevitably takes place in the power vacuum, which is obviously not what we want to see. So I would like to see that shift happen as non-violently as possible, and it'll take time. I don't even know if it'll happen in my lifetime, but from that space of dismantling the corporatocracy, the other will fall into place. Everything from the feminist movement to the Black Lives Matter to the environment, these things will shift to the interests of the people. There was a poll during Occupy. They asked 18 to 32-year-olds that weren't involved with Occupy, but just were sort of the apathetic, typical my generation, unfortunately. They asked them a series of questions, and based on the responses, they found that the majority of 18 to 32-year-olds are almost socialist. They're so far left, they're almost socialist. And not using that word, but just asking them a series of questions. So I think if we were to wake up, I think that we could really turn this country around, and that's what it would look like. And I don't advocate socialism. I grew up in Sweden, and I know that straight socialism doesn't work. I don't think that a straight-ism ever works. I think what you need to do is you need to incorporate concepts of socialism. You need to take the idea of what's the word? Competition from capitalism and infuse that, because monopolies are obviously dangerous. You need to take from several different isms and create just what works best for you. And I think this country has the potential to do that. We just have fallen so far behind our own ideologies and our own ideals, and we can catch up with them. We can do better. That's what I'd really like to see. And I think it's possible, although, again, I don't know if it'll happen even in my lifetime, but I would like to see it at least start.
That's great.
I would like to leave a creative activist legacy. I would like to leave art. I would like to leave music. I would like to leave poetry and writing that moves people and moves them in a social and political way as well. Art is the emotional language of humanity, regardless of where you come from and who you are. It is the emotional connectivity of us humans. And of course, social and political activism is what evolves humankind. So those two together is what I would like to leave. That's the legacy that I would like to leave. Well, probably the easiest way is artkillingapathy.com. And there you have links to the show that I do every week. I do a show for Occupy.com called Act Out, which focuses specifically on creative activism and grassroots activism. And there is also a link to the band there. The band is called Rooftop Revolutionaries. And I'm also on Facebook, of course, Eleanor Goldfield. So there aren't that many Eleanor Goldfield, so if you just Google me as well, you'll probably find me. Thank you so much. You too.